We are we have really prepared great content, great stories to share with you. The purpose of our webinar today, really at a high level, is to share our, an update in regards to the second year of the AAPI Pathway Project cohort with all of you. It consists of a working group and then also a affinity group of our AAPI community throughout the coastline of California. And additionally, we have curated a research report from cohort 2 that we cannot wait to share with all of you. And the purpose of the report is to broaden all of our knowledge really and for organizations to look for ways in furthering engaging the AAPI community and your community members in collaborating on ocean and MPA stewardship. With that being said, next slide, please. I'll turn it over to Jamie to share with us about the collaborative network.
Hey everyone, my name is Jamie Blatter. I work for the Marine Protected Area Collaborative Network, and I just kind of wanted to take a moment to put today's event in a larger context, give a little background on the collaborative network. And so we have 14 chapters, which we call collaboratives throughout coastal California. And we are a nonprofit that partners closely with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, who manages marine protected areas. And we also collaborate with a lot of other agencies. And our goal is to bring people together and bring communities together across sectors, across backgrounds, to work collectively to steward California's coast and ocean. So as you can see here, we have over 1,700 members from over 450 affiliations, including nonprofits, agencies, tribal members and tribal representatives. We have science and academia, community volunteers, commercial and recreational fishers. And so we invite you to join your local chapter if you'd like to get involved, meet other people working in this space, work on projects together, and share resources. Next slide, please. And then in addition to the 14 chapters, we have 3 Pathways community groups. So the Asian American Pacific Islander is one of them, and they put together the report that you'll be hearing about today. But we also have 2 other Pathways affinity spaces. One is for folks that identify as Black and one for folks that identify as Latine. And the groups come together with shared identities to learn from each other, work on projects of their own choosing. And there's a number of amazing projects that have come out of this, such as the AAPI group last year made a Marine Lunar New Year calendar. The Latine group made a MPA-focused Loteria card game. The Black group has hosted an in-person or supported in-person events such as a Liberation paddle out for Juneteenth. And there's so much more work that these groups are doing. So if you identify as being a member of any of these communities, we welcome you to join these spaces. And now I'm going to turn it over to Michelle and the rest of the group today to share about their work.
Great, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jamie. So before we get started, I just wanted to share with everyone a couple of housekeeping items. Throughout today's presentation, please feel free to use the chat button to engage with us, and most importantly, ask any question you have. We'll make sure to be monitoring the chat, and most importantly, I will also make sure that we are able to answer your questions, either myself, with Jamie at the Collaborative Network, or our guest speaker, Sherry, and also Grace, who are members of our AAPI Affinity Group. Additionally, I also would love for you to take a moment, if you are looking to, if there are any specific topics, or I'm actually just very curious, and what motivated you to join our webinar today? What would you like to hear more about? There may be things that we will cover in today's session, or maybe there are things that we may not have included in today's content, but most importantly, it will help us learn more about you and then also additionally support one another. So if you could take a moment, use the chat button and drop in what motivated you to come to today's webinar. And additionally, if there are any specific topics that you would like to learn more about as we go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. Thank you. With that, just a quick intro before I turn it over to our amazing Sherry Ng. But myself, my name is Michelle Tron. I am the AAPI Pathway Project Coordinator, working with the Collaborative Network Organization, as well as with leading our AAPI Community Group. As I mentioned, I have the honor of this being concluding on my second year of leading the AAPI Pathway Group. Additionally, I am very equity-centered community advocate. I really believe in creating an equitable space in marine stewardship, as well as in all of our community. Aside from my time of supporting stewardship and then also working with the Collaborative Network, I'm also in my daytime, I'm a growth advisor, also working with several national nonprofits, and then also small businesses here in Southern California. So with that being said, I will turn it over to Sherry. Next slide.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Ng, and I'm a participant in the 2026 AAPI Working Group cohort. It's an honor to be here today and to have supported this critical work for the last few months. I must say for myself, I've approached it humbly not as a marine expert, but as a parent of three, a community member, a former school teacher, and marketer, all these roles navigating AAPI belonging in everyday life. And I have to say, before this work, I had not seen a long history of people like me reflected in ocean conservation spaces. The barriers weren't just physical, they were cultural and psychological. But now I'm so glad we're seeing intentionality behind this work. And by ways of an introduction, I wanted to give you a glimpse into my personal why for AAPI representation in ocean conservation. So next slide, please. As I mentioned, I'm a parent of kids in two different bilingual school communities, early education and K through 8. And so on the left is a hand-drawn illustration by my 8-year-old daughter, created to showcase a healthy ocean food web. And because she didn't have access to it, she actually had to create her own bilingual signage for the food web, including producers, secondary consumers, primary consumers, predators. It was her own way of creating the language of Chinese and bringing into her learning of marine life. And I have to say, as a former multiple subject teacher myself, this bilingual programming wasn't necessarily available to me when I was teaching either. So it's very important to kind of bring that cultural element into what we're doing today. As another example, on my right is a video of how we incorporate cultural storytelling into our own family learning of the ocean. So if we can play the video, please. I think looks like we might have some access.
Are you able to just share it in the chat instead?
Let's take a look. It was actually shared previously. If not, it is actually a video of my daughters walking through the legend of the ocean in the Chinese culture, but we can drop it in, let's see. We can drop it in there after. I don't know if I can easily pull it up, but all that to say, to round out, overall, these were just two artifacts. It's a small glimpse into my own lived experience as to why I'm so passionate about AAPI engagement in coastal spaces and why this investment into the future is just so important. And so my mission is to ensure that we're actually bringing a family and educational perspective into MPA stewardship and ocean conservation. So thank you so much for allowing me to share that. I will see if I can grab that video and put it in there. But in the meantime, I'll go ahead and hand it to Grace.
Thank you so much, Sherry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grace. I'm a participant of the current 2026 AAPI Working Group cohort, and also a member in the past year when it was established. I just want to thank MPA Collaborative and the Affinity Group for the opportunity to be part of this webinar and then to share my perspective. I wanted to discuss briefly the topic of AAPI representation in ocean conservation, and my experience as an early career scientist in coastal policy. So I previously worked in environmental education and also public programs and teaching aquariums and around MPAs in the Orange County and LA County. However, in these organizations, I noticed that over the years, apart from my coworkers, management weren't people of color. And the higher the management hierarchy went, the representation of people of color became few and far in between. And so this trend, I saw it was repeated again and again during my career trajectory, during graduate school, and also as a fellow in a state agency. And I think this lack of representation has made me feel lonely and separated, not feeling like I belong there entirely. And often my imposter syndrome will make me wonder, how am I going to be successful in the future when there are so few leadership that looks like me and so many that I can't relate to? So next slide, please. So when this working group was introduced, I was able to discourse my personal barriers and found out that we collectively have a common challenge. So after working together, such as the Lunar New Year horoscope with sea animals and creating a webinar panel on AAPI experiences, I felt inspired and gratified that I am able to connect with others while expressing my culture and working towards goals in marine conservation. And I realized that I'm not alone, but there are others that I can relate to, such as members in the AAPI group who are volunteers, they're students, they're concerned citizens, and they're also heads of organizations that are passionate about conserving our coast. So it's extremely heartening to see that AAPI leaders in experienced roles, such as George Matsumoto, Shauna Oh, and Susan Park, just to name a few, and these individuals may represent as my role models. And it also gives me hope that I also have a chance to work and make a living in coastal management. And so one of the biggest lessons from being an active and leading member in the MPA collaborative networks is to lead through representation. I never asked anyone whether I have ever inspired them, but I hope that my presence and other AAPIs within the coastal management realm, whether it's in conferences or researching out in the field or hosting webinars, will eventually normalize and inspire the acceptance of a more inclusive environment. So I want to persuade those that have imposter syndrome that our ethnicity and race is not a hindrance, but rather as a contributing factor to widen and provide different helpful perspectives. And hopefully in the future, when I have a more permanent role in MPA or coastal management, that I can also inspire others to reach past their barriers and continue to strive for their dreams. Next slide. And another lesson I learned during my career is that having a network of people that I can relate to and that I can express myself freely is very important to me psychologically and socially. And that is why one of the reasons that I joined the AAPI Affinity Group and be involved in other organizations, such as another AAPI environmental organization that meets monthly. And so by actively searching and participating in these interest groups that have the same goals and passions that I have, I had opportunities to be involved with the AAPI population, such as advocating and lobbying for environmental justice, and also being involved as a scholar for coastal and estuarine research that promoted diversity during my graduate school days. So even though I moved to Central Coast for my fellowship recently, I am physically away from my usual support group and community, but I continue to connect with others that I have similarity with, and I work towards creating a supported network wherever my career takes me next. So thank you for listening to my experiences in representation, and I will turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you so much, Grace. And thank you again for sharing that lived experience with both Sherry and Grace. We are all gathered here today, and because we each are driven, inspired, and motivated by wanting to do more than what we did before. And particularly, I really wanted to thank all of the attendees that have signed on to today's webinar, because you guys are the allies for representation, for inclusion. And that really means not only it means so much to all of us here, but also I wanted to share a little bit with you. If we could backtrack to a year ago when our cohort, our second cohort started, and that was during when the federal government started to make a lot of cuts around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as we embark on the second cohort, all of our community members asked ourselves, and one of the things was certain is inaction, doing nothing is not an option. And so when we all gather together around what can we actually further to learn about about the environment of MPA ocean stewardship, and as well as how can we foster a more collaborative process with all of you in engaging with the AAPI community, we started out with the research process. And within that research process, it became and turned into the outcome of the research report that we just recently published on the MPA Collaborative Network website, which you'll see the link in the chat. But today, we prepared a few slides in the next 30 minutes or so that we want to walk you through on giving you a highlight of what we gather from the research, and also most importantly, what are some of the key takeaways that you can bring back to your organization or into your community and furthering that conversation and the dialogue to promoting AAPI engagement. So with that being said, first of all, we're on this slide, the context on AAPI, first of all, is the fastest growing population in the United States. That growth is not slowing down. We all know that California is the most populous state for the Asian American Pacific Islander community, and coastal California is one of the most concentrated landing place for that demographic shift. But when we look at who is sitting at the table in ocean stewardship and governance, whether it's on agency boards, in MPA advisory bodies, and conservation leadership, that growth is not reflected currently. There is a persistent, measurable gap between communities living alongside our coast and the community making decisions about that coast. And this is at the heart of what our research report, The Ties of Belonging, is trying to do. Most of us on this webinar already have the intent, as I mentioned. Thank you all for being allies, because we all know that engagement matters. However, the challenge and the opportunity is moving us from intent to action, as well as measurable impact. And that is what the MPA Collaborative Network Pathway Project is set out to do. And that is the lens for everything that you'll see in the next few slides. Next slide. Before we talk about any strategy of engagement, we first have to talk about the framing, because it is the way how we define the community as well as shapes everything else. First, I think there's one key takeaway from the research report is AAPI is not a monolith. AAPI is a diaspora, is under that single acronym around we are holding dozens of distinct languages, the immigration history, generational experiences, the relationship to the coast, and also if our engagement treats AAPI community as one audience, we will almost miss everybody in the community group. Additionally, these relationships with the coast are layered. Our AAPI community is shaped by its ancestry, the migration pattern, the labor people that have done at the water's edge, and in some cases by survival itself. So for example, a Vietnamese refugee fisher on a public pier and a fourth generation Japanese American family in Monterey both of them are bringing very distinct, very different story to the same shoreline, and we must acknowledge that. The third area is the coast is both an opportunity as it is exclusion. It is a place for livelihood, for food, for ceremony, and also for joy that you heard from Sherry's lived experience story. It is also a place where many AAPI communities have been pushed out in the past or made to feel unwelcome in the past. So both of those truths have to be acknowledged at the same time if we really want to set out to create meaningful engagement. We cannot engage authentically if we're only telling the celebratory half of that story. Next slide, please. So let's get concrete for a moment. Our report breaks the diaspora into 4 broad archetypes, not to box anyone in, but really is to help organizations recognize that engagement must look different depending on who they're trying to reach. Now, I'm not talking about going out there and translating your collateral 7 different languages, 12 different fonts, but first understanding the 4 distinct archetypes on the AAPI community. First, the Pacific Islanders are the communities with ancestral seafaring tradition, voyaging knowledge, and questions of sovereignty that long predates the modern conservation movement. Now, when you engage here, you're engaging with a culture for whom ocean is king, not just resources. The second, the Southeast Asian refugee and immigrant community, the Vietnamese, the Cambodian, the Mon, Lao family, who relationship to the California coast is often built around small scale and pier fishing. For many of these families, what looked like recreation to an outsider is actually a food choice. That matters when we talk about regulation. The third are the East Asian communities, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, whose ties tend to come through food, heritage, mariculture, and longstanding coastal traditions. When you're thinking about seaweed harvesting, shellfish, or even just Lunar New Year tradition that are often tied to the sea. And fourth, the Filipinos and South Asian communities with deep maritime history and increasingly a frontline relationship with climate resilience because of where they live and work. So if there's one slide, one key takeaway I really want to leave you in regards to this slide is a one-size-fits-all approach will not land you the result that you or your organization is looking to achieve. It's not a one-size-fits-all, but really focusing on your engagement, or when you're thinking about the AAPI community, think mindful, curated approach to recognizing the distinct heritage of AAPI community and then expanding from there. And most importantly, the MPA Collaborative Network and us as your AAPI affinity group members become your resource and your ally to achieving that. Next slide, please. So now that we know the 4 archetypes, and let's talk about barriers. Let's identify those barriers, and then we can talk more about ways to engage. So if we know engagement has to be tailored as the organization or as the community is not a monolith, what's actually getting in the way? Our AAPI, our Ties of Belonging AAPI research report identifies 4 categories, key 4 categories of barrier. And I want to spend a moment on each of them because most of these are actually fixable. They're actually actions that we can take today, right after our webinar, that you can take to further the engagement. First of all is resource gap. Most outreach materials are printed or produced in English and oftentimes printed on paper. They're distributed at in-person events. Majority, according to our survey, a lot of these engagements with the AAPI community are in-person event. Now, that leaves out anyone whose primary language isn't English and anyone whose main device is a phone. And linguistically appropriate mobile-first materials are still the exception, not the rule. So something to keep in mind of. Second barrier is the accessibility. We talk a lot about physical access to the coast, but the bigger barrier for working class AAPI family is what the report called as time poverty. If you're working 2 jobs and the public meeting is at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday at a venue that's 30 or 40 minutes away, that member is functionally excluded. So the cost of showing up gas, childcare, lost wage is real for engagement. The third area is the psychological barrier. Now, this is the one we don't talk about enough. Many AAPI communities, especially for those Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander fishers, have experienced years of over-policing at the water's edge. Wardens checking licenses, citations issued in English, encounters that feel like enforcement rather than education. Now, that creates a sense of non-belonging that no outreach flyer is going to fix. And finally, tokenization. This one is the most painful because it usually comes from well-intentioned organizations. It's about check the box participation, inviting community members to one meeting, listen politely, nod, and then making decisions you were already going to make. Communities can't tell. And once that trust is broken, it's going to take years to repair and also rebuild. Next slide, please. So we talked about barriers. We talked about the categories of distinction. Let's move on into how do we put all of this learning into action? But before I share on ways to engage and then also act upon, I want to focus on the blue box here, is what is the reality? According to our survey at the initial phase of our research of our cohort 2, we surveyed a lot of different steward and conservation organizations. And that survey told us very clearly that 70% of organizations currently in California working in coastal stewardship and conservation lack any AAPI-focused partnership. Now, I'm not talking about they don't see AAPI community coming in their facilities or participating in the meeting. They have members that are within the AAPI community. They just don't have a concerted strategy or effort to be thinking about how do we further the meaning and the engagement. And the truth is we need to, and we should. And I'm so glad that all of you are on this call today, learning more and then having this dialogue around how can we further engage. So how do we move? In the report, you're going to find 3 shifts. The first one is shared authority. There's a real difference between asking a community for input and then giving them a vote. So advisory feedback is easy to thank people for and then ignore. But giving the AAPI community member a seat at the table is not. And if your governance structure have no AAPI vote, that's really where you can start right away. The second one is building together. So you want to set the goal together, define what success looks like together, measure it together. The collaborative network team and our AAPI Pathway Project Affinity Group have been talking a lot about cohort 3 in the year upcoming. What are we going to do? How are we going to further bring value to further engage everyone on this call, as well as all of the stewardship organization? What type of materials and tools can we serve you? Because the goal is that we want to build it together with you. The Pathway Project is not in its own silo that is offshoot to be doing something on our own. It's together collectively with everyone on this call, because communities aren't beneficiaries of our project, and because they should be co-architects of your project and your initiative. So when AAPI community comes to the table to help you set the metric, they're going to show up to hit it. And the third one, and this one really matters, it's around paying for expertise. Cultural knowledge is a professional labor. A community elder who spent 3 hours helping you translate a concept into something that resonates with their community has done consulting work. And that is truly how you want to treat it that way, whether it's in honorariums, in stipends, and paid partnership, as we share honorarium and stipends with our affinity group. The fastest way to signal that we take a community seriously is to put real money behind their time and honoring and respecting their time. Next slide, please. If sharing authority is the principle, data justice is how we go about operationalizing it. 4 practices that we encourage every collaborative organization to adopt is disaggregation. So starting with the first one on disaggregation. Stop reporting AAPI as one number. When you aggregate all together, of course, going back to our first slide, is we are not one single group. There's a very diverse group within the AAPI community. And when we aggregate that together, we mask the communities that needs the most support, because data of higher income subgroups will average out the urgency of lower income subgroups. So when we break it upon the Cambodians, Filipino, the Chinese, they each have a story of their own. And additionally, on a give back, and then secondly is a give back policy on if you're collecting data from a community, build in how that community benefits from the data, not someday by design, but you want to do it from the start, because research is very valuable when you are able to reciprocate. Also, you want to close the loop. And around data, when you're thinking about data justice and ethical research, is closing the loop on reporting your findings back to the community. And also, when you're communicating back, be considerate of their primary language. You don't want to just communicate, focus on connecting, and that is good equity practice. And finally, is the impact over attendance. Most of us measure how many people show up to the meeting. And also, additionally, you want to be thinking about, going back to the point about engagement, is the percentage of community suggestions actually gets adopted into the final plan. And you want to show for that. You want to share that with the community so that they are also fully understanding and aware of the process that's being through. And that is great engagement, because that number will tell you whether engagement was real. So I'm going to pause for a moment, because I know we've gone through many slides and a lot of information on the report, but I just wanted to pause for a moment and to see if there's any questions on the previous slides or any comments right there. Let's see.
Sherry, or Michelle, we do have a question in the chat about
Okay.
translation services.
So Cynthia is asking, are state parks struggles with translating material into Spanish and Chinese, the most common primary language for visitors outside of English? But as a government organization, we face a lot of barriers for hiring contractor for translation. Are there any ethical ways for accessing free translation services? That's a great question, Cynthia. I think a lot of times, especially with the advancement of technology, I can see a lot of organizations using Google Translate. Now, I will say this though. I think Google Translate have actually made a tremendous amount of progress when it comes to cultural relevance, because when it comes to translating material, cultural relevance is always on top of mind. So I do think that with technological advancement, and particularly with Google Translate, I have actually seen a lot more success with Google Translate as it was, say, 2 or 3 years ago, or even when we started the Pathway Group project. But I do think that if, specifically with ethical ways on accessing translation, utilizing, adopting technology such as Google Translate, but engaging your community members and sharing the material with them, to ensuring that it's culturally relevant, and also making sure that you have members at the table, as I mentioned before. Those are ultimately great ways on engagement, as well as the ethical ways on accessing translation services. Sherry, do you have anything that you want to add, especially from your experience?
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle, for that opportunity. I think one thing that you highlighted that resonates is that more often than not, we think about translation in terms of the actual words, but as we consider the audience itself, especially as we think of park materials or others, there could be things that range between age groups, cultural groups that we have to also consider in terms of cultural and age relevance. And so that is where engagement with the communities, with local groups is so important. And as you highlighted before in a previous slide, building together and sharing that, and then also being able to compensate our partners would be very much a step that we would recommend as well.
Great. Well, very insightful. Thank you, Sherry. Great question. Thank you. And please keep your questions coming. And again, we want to make sure that we're engaging everyone on this call. And even if there are points of questions that we cannot answer today, we'll make sure to get back to you, as your question is very valuable to us and how we go about designing the future of Pathway Project. All right, moving on to next slide. So this is all, so very excitingly, I want to share with you a few effective engagement strategy that we came up with our community group. So as we get more practical on understanding what's actually working in the field, Here are, by the way, you'll notice a lot of our slides in a lot of our research report, there's a lot of 3s and 4 categories, top 3 items. And this is all really assembled in a very curated, mindful way by the group, because we all want to give you very digestible information that you can actually take and tools that you can adopt to further the engagement. Effective engagement strategy. Here are the 4 top strategies that the affinity group come up with that we wanted to share with you. And these are also the 4 strategies collected from the experience of our community group that we consistently have saw that really drove results in their community. Number 1 is the trusted channel. AAPI community really don't just get their news from anywhere. They find the channels from media outlets, from community affinity groups, from stewardship groups, and that's how they gather their information. And they trust that information. So specifically speaking, for an example, in language media outlets, whether it's the Filipino channel or the Vietnamese news or KTSF 26 here, if you're in the Bay Area, these are, or to a lot of these community platforms like WhatsApp, WeChat, and Line. A lot of the mommy groups in Southern California, as I learned from Sherry, that there are also these WhatsApp and WeChat groups. And those are ultimately channels and trusted channels, as we call them in the report, that you can tap into and then also leverage. Now, if you're unaware of a lot of these channels, once again, our affinity group and our Pathway Project becomes your resource in sharing with you on the tools that you can leverage. And you can also find them specifically in the research report, in the PDF version of the research report, on giving you resources that you can find and channels that you can engage with. It's important to remember and utilize these in-language media channels when you have the capacity to. So this will often help you deliver a more engaging experience, especially for those in-language media channels for older generation, in ensuring that you're engaging the overall population. The second effective strategy is visual inclusion. Bilingual signage at trailheads and tide pools, symbols or pictograms that are culturally legible. Or if you think about a sign that is in English only at a fishing pier, but located in a heavily Vietnamese community, is functionally a sign that is telling that community this place isn't really for you. So you want to focus on the small change, but big signal. First, think about the overall who's the member of your community. Third area around cultural storytelling, multi-generational events where elders, parents, and kids show up together. Community mural projects. At the beginning of our session, we heard about Sherry's lived experience and also her work on family storytelling. That's a perfect example. Families come together and they too, as you, share the love for the ocean, share the love for the community. People don't just engage with conservation as an abstraction. They're truly there to engage with stories. So utilize stories to further engage and then also include them. And last but not least, on reframing the goal. I feel like a lot of times the word conservation or stewardship can feel very distant, especially and also very daunting for the AAPI community. It feels like it's something that's really done for the ocean rather than for the people. But we really need to, in order for any stewardship to happen, we must first engage and involve and include the people first. So when you reframe MPA as a contributor to health, to food security, to communal pantry, to the community, now all of a sudden it will map into something every family cares about, including most importantly on your engagement with the AAPI community. Next slide, please. On the next slide, in terms of how we go about building the bench on professional pipeline development. This actually came very early on, and this was one of my key ahas in the first year when we led the Pathway Project. And particularly, this really resonates with what Grace just talked about. Feeling included, feeling like I am able to see myself in this work of conservation and stewardship. Engagement at the community level is just one half of of the story, one half of the success that you're trying to build it with engagement. But the other half is looking at who's actually working inside your organization or all of our organization. Because representation starts from within. And if we don't fill the pipeline, that representation gap will ultimately diminish, or it's going to refresh itself every 5 years, right? And a lot of organizations currently do have the intent to hire diverse talent at the intro level, and then they end up losing them by year 3, year 5. So think about that as your leak, right? It's the mid-career. If the young student graduating from marine biology is entering the organization, there has to be support that goes somewhere. Our affinity group provides that support. All of your support and collaboration within the collaborative network also provides that support. And I think that's really key to also focus on in terms of working with one another and building that talent pool within the stewardship, within the conservation space. Second category is economic access, paid internship. Any type of unpaid internship is really a wealth filter. They screen out the very community we say that we want to bring in. So if your entry pathway requires a summer of unpaid work, you probably have already lost a lot of the AAPI working class candidates. The third category is retention. So once again, building the pipeline, building the bench is retaining the AAPI members. On most organizations do exit interviews. I'm sure many of us probably have participated in one, but almost none do stay interviews. So if today in your organization, you do have AAPI members, this is the moment where you can ask people who are still there, what's making you stay? What purpose are you fulfilling? What is the motivation? And how do you go about sharing that motivation to recruit other members? Or even asking the real question of, are you even thinking about leaving? Are you at a moment where you feel what are the additional support that your organization can offer to a mid-career AAPI member? That conversation really helps surface the real barriers on promoting long before you end up losing the person and losing that valuable AAPI perspective within your organization. And last but not least, if you're able to develop a formal leadership track, mentorship that are structured, not just informal of a water cooler conversation. In the first year, in addition to the Lunar New Year initiative that we administered and that we hosted, towards the end of it, we heard our community group loud and clear, and we wanted to start by creating and building inclusivity in the stewardship place on seeing yourself and developing a career into that. So we actually administer a scholarship, an AAPI scholarship sponsored by the Pathway Project, by the Collaborative Network. And we granted 3 graduate school students and then also 1 undergrad in promoting their inclusivity in pursuing a career. And they're now, and actually one of them is Brenda and Clarence, who actually joined cohort 2. And that is the gift that keeps giving. Because if someone with the power to advocate you in a room that you're not in, that is truly how senior leadership eventually start to reflect the community we serve. Next slide, please. Some of the recommended action, as you'll see in our report for you and also the other collaborative network members is, so if you're a collaborative member sitting in this webinar and asking, okay, Michelle, what do I actually do tomorrow morning or next Monday morning? So here are 5 concrete actions that you can actually take, either one or a couple of them, and start to implement in your organization. And that is where we can continue to start this start the interaction of engagement. I want to encourage every single one of you to look at the slide and pick at least one of them and commit to them this quarter. Number 1, listen first. Before you walk into any community with your project pitch, walk in with questions. The first 3 meetings you want to care about is understanding what matters to the API community, not just about explaining what matters to you and how much funds you want to raise, how many volunteers you want to recruit, but you want to listen first, asking them what are their challenges, how would they like to be engaged, what's on their mind, and how can you collaborate to support them as they will come back to support you. Identify their priorities. Map what surfaces in those conversations against your work. You want to, sometimes you may not be able to find the perfect alignment, but sometimes you'll find what the community actually needs, and it's something that you can broker with another agency, with another organization. Both outcomes builds trust with one another. Number 3, compensate fairly. We talked about an internship without pay is really a wealth filter. So you want to build a budget line for community honorarium into every grant application. If you can't fund the time of the people you're partnering with, if you probably won't be very successful in having a partnership, because you're going to exclude out those that are functionally not going to be able to participate. So you want to be mindful of that. And of course, those are opportunities where you could collaborate with us, and then as the collaboration will be able to provide support to one another. Connect early. You don't want to show up to a community 2 weeks before a grant deadline asking for a letter of support. You definitely want to build a relationship, and then this is a relationship that you can lean in on and then you can rely on later. And last but not least, make it real. Set a scheduled start date, calendar it, gather your team, talk about the fact that you are committed to designing an engagement strategy to the AAPI community. It starts somewhere. Aspirational engagements that live within in a strategic plan really never happens. You want to have concrete dates with action, even if it's just one of them, even if it's just about going into the community to listen in, or contacting one of the in-language media channel to broaden your message, to further the engagement and also the support. Next slide, please. So that is all practically the playbook, and also a synthesized readout of our report, of our 20-page AAPI Ties of Belonging research report that we produced with the under the brain trust of our AAPI community group for our Pathway project. And ultimately, we just wanted to share this closing vision with you on belonging for all. And the way to go about making California's coast a home for every community is by starting with today's webinar, by having this engagement, this dialogue, and by investing in people, because real conversation starts with a real partnership. We, on behalf of the Collaborative Network, Kala, and then Claire, Jamie, Aubrey, we really welcome you to further our conversation, engage with our specialists, follow us on our social media channel. I also included our Pathway, our API Pathway Project Gmail. So if you have any question, you can also engage with your specialist, or you can email us. So with that being said, I will pause and look at some questions. Thank you, Claire. Claire already dropped the link to the report here again. So if anyone have any question in regards to the research report, additionally, we are also very interested in asking you, now that you have sat through a summary readout of this report, what are some of the tools, or what are some of the challenges that you foresee in terms of AAPI, engaging with the AAPI community, or if you feel more confident and more enthused about making this a priority? Any comment or any challenges that you care to share? Kala, do you have any feedback or any input from the session?
I just think it was really, really well done, super informative. Just appreciate everything that the AAPI community group has done. Great. I think Jamie put a good question in the chat that I think we do get a lot from collaborative members, and especially our co-chairs that are trying to just get started. Does it make sense to look up AAPI focus groups in their area and reach out? What would be a good first step?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So in the report, on the last section of the report, we actually included a resource section with organizations that you can reach out to, and also organizations that you can log onto their website. We have the live links all readily available, that you can learn more about, and you can find an organization that aligns with your priorities and reach out to them, to establish partnership. Sherry, now, I know you're an active community member. Do you have any additional input on that?
I think that would be an absolutely great start and to formally start to make those connections. But I also encourage our groups informally. Organizations will recommend other organizations. So just starting those conversations early and being able to have an understanding of what is happening in your local community is very important. So as one of the examples is reaching out, absolutely start those conversations because they will recommend others as well.
Great, thank you. Great question.
And then a question I have heard too that I wanted to just also express is, are there any, obstacles or pitfalls to avoid, when approaching somebody? I think a lot of people are afraid of making assumptions. So is there a way to say, do you identify with the AAPI community? Is this, a community you'd be willing to share? Like, what is the best way? I know sometimes you can't avoid pitfalls, and you're going to stick your foot in your mouth, and we shouldn't be afraid of that either. But what would be your advice of some things to avoid or ways to approach that conversation?
Yeah, Sherry, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I can certainly add my perspective. And that's a great question because within our working group itself, we've also had that discussion about potentially being afraid to make mistakes, especially in the era of social media. And what we had highlighted is that intentionality is so important. And so starting the conversation in a very open way of these are our goals we are hoping to achieve. We would love to understand yours. And having that be the context allows us to have very open conversations that does not have to be, something that we're afraid to engage in. And I think local community groups are very open to that, and especially understanding that intentionality. With that said, we also want to make sure that within kind of any conversations that you are listening as much as you are having and sharing. And so in that, you're able to understand the goals of the other groups and see if you are aligned. So that would be one recommendation. Is there anything else, Michelle, that I'm not recalling from that previous conversation?
No, that's great. Very, very well said. Thank you so much, Sherry. I think it's important, being a minority woman, and also an active AAPI community advocate. I do think that being able to act upon it rather than not, I think that is a very important part. And also one of the things that is very important is when Kala and the Collaborative Network team set out the Pathway project, it is meant to be a resource for everyone, for the Collaborative Network. And we too hope that by us embarking on a cohort 3, year 3 of it, that we remain as your ally, as your support in running ideas through. If you have any talks that there's an opportunity that our community members, such as Sherry, such as Grace, or any other member in the local area that can participate on, I think those are ultimately areas that we would want to collaborate on. Cynthia has a question. Actually, both Cynthia and Robert has a comment on past operation and data would be great to read. And in fact, Cynthia, so the recommended programs, we actually have that in the report. And within the section of the report, we actually included some best practices on ways to counter the barriers, as well as some of the past projects that we have also seen and done that the affinity group has actually pulled together to share out on ways that are actually very effective and also useful. But keeping in mind, it's never going to be a one size fits all. But that's why we welcome your collaboration. And of course, initiative like this requires support from you all, and then also from organization leaders. So if you know of any opportunity for resources, please share it with us so that we can continue this great work moving forward. And we're almost at time. Kala, Jamie, Aubrey, and Claire, I really just wanted to say thank you all for your support and the opportunity for all of us to be a part of this. And, and it just coincidentally, it's May. It's actually the AAPI Heritage Month. And I just wanted to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for your support and then also the guidance in allowing us to share our program today. Cynthia has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to pop in when you're talking about resources and didn't realize my camera is kind of messed up here. But at Angel Island, we do offer virtual tours of the Detention Barracks Museum, which is connected to the Asian exclusion era of the early 1900s. We actually bring an iPad and walk through the building with us, and that is a completely free resource. And so if you're interested in getting your organization to have a tour, if you have a school group that wants to get a tour, that is something that we offer for free.
Amazing. Well, thank you all for your time and the collaboration and also your support to the Collaborative Network and also the Pathway Project. And we look forward to sharing more with you in the upcoming year. Bye, everyone.